Hi guys, and welcome to the Undefined Talk Show. Our aim of this talk show is simple. Through interviewing guests that have taken unconventional routes to get where they are, we want to show you that you don't have to follow a fixed route to get to where you want to. Some of our guests are students who are in industries traditionally dominated by adults. We also have tech entrepreneurs who may not even have a tech background. And if you're from Singapore or a traditional Asian country, you know that there is usually a fixed path that our parents tell us to take. In this talk show, we also interview individuals who are doing the coolest things, from setting up their own cafes to being artists and more. So sit back and enjoy the show.
Okay, welcome to our talk show. This is going to be our first ever episode, and today we are joined with Markus, who is the founder of IB Lounge, who also happens to be our sponsor for today. So IB Lounge is a specialized IB tuition service in Singapore, and they have kindly agreed to give us this place to record our first episode today. So a little bit more about Markus. He's basically a NUS business student currently. Yes, and he started this tuition center when he was just 19 years old. No, when he was just 21 years old. Yes, when he was just 21 years old. So today I'm going to be asking him a few questions about how he overcame the challenges and the odds to basically start this tuition service at such a young age. So, hello Markus.
Hello.
Okay, so maybe let's just start with some questions about the tuition industry or the business itself in general. Right. So, what do you actually do?
So basically, what it is a specialized tuition service just for the IBDP. So I have a team of tutors who work in IB Lounge as well, and we all provide this tuition service for children or for students rather, who are in the IBDP program. Yeah.
Okay, so specifically, what do you think sets IB Lounge apart from the other IB tuition centers out there?
Right. So I think the main thing is our people, right? So apart from like other tuition centers or tuition services, one thing that we specialize in is providing IB graduates to actually mentor and to guide the new batch of IB students. So this is, I wouldn't say it's a completely new model, but we are probably the only service that only has IB graduates and who only have these young enthusiastic people who are teaching the next generation. So I think that's probably our biggest difference. And all our resources are also handmade and crafted from these IB graduates. Yeah.
Wow, okay, that's actually pretty interesting, especially because there aren't a lot of IB graduates compared to A-level graduates in Singapore.
Right.
So definitely finding these students as well as the tutors must be pretty difficult for you.
So it is. I'm lucky because I myself am an IB graduate. I was from an IB school in Singapore. So naturally, I have that connection with other students and my juniors. Some of them are my peers. Yeah, so that's basically the people we have here mostly. Yeah.
Okay, nice. Yeah, that's a good thing to hear. Okay, so let's start off with how this whole tuition idea came about. Right. So when did you first think of this idea? How did you first think of it?
Right. So I think the first conceptualization was really after NS, whereby I thought that it would be a good idea to basically start a business and to basically address a need that I've been having for the longest time. So it all started when I was an IB student myself, and I didn't really have I didn't really feel like I had the right mentorship outside of school, because the tutors that I found were not IB trained, and they couldn't really empathize with myself, and they couldn't really provide the right resources or the right mentorship basically in terms of the IB program. So I really felt kind of the pinch when I was in school already. So after NS, I decided to basically try to meet that need. Yeah.
Wow, okay. And as you mentioned, rightfully so, that even though the IB is quite a concentrated industry in that sense, there are likely already some tuition centers doing IB, right?
Yeah.
So what do you think made you go up against these much bigger centers, especially since you're just a 21-year-old student at that time?
Right. Actually, I didn't really think about it much at that point. I just thought that no one had done it this way. and I felt like the traditional way of doing it wasn't really addressing some of the needs that IB students had. So I thought like I actually didn't really consider them to be my direct competitors much, because the model that they were operating in was very different, and it has been the same way for many years. So I decided to try something new and to do this. Yeah.
Okay, and when you first entered as a new entrant to this field, what were some of the biggest challenges that you faced?
I think the biggest challenge is that most of the problems that we face is really like a chicken and egg problem. So, for example, it's hard to motivate people to join you when you don't have students, right? We're not bringing in revenue. But at the same time, it's also hard to get students if you don't have the people or the resources. So I think that was probably the biggest challenge. Another thing that I can think of is convincing people that this model works. Rather to convince people that they should try this model. I think that was also very difficult at the start.
Okay. I see. Okay, so one group of people that you had to convince was the tutors and the students to join you. But I'm sure another group would have been your parents and friends who might have been against you starting this company. So what do you think made you go against whatever these guys were saying?
So I was quite fortunate because my parents were rather supportive. They were okay with me trying this idea, especially it's just after NS and there's nothing much to do. So I decided to just try it because they were quite supportive anyways. My friends, I think they were rather supportive. Some even joined me on the venture. They were like initial tutors. Some also helped me publicize and things like that. So I'm definitely grateful for that. But like every new venture, like this is the theme of the talk show, right? Something new. It's also, you will also definitely get like what I like to call like naysayers, like people who tell you like, oh, you can't do this, or why you can't do this. And I think the most important thing to remember is that you will never really know unless you try it, right? Like there's really no way to tell whether something will work out or not unless you try it. So going in with that attitude will really, or did really help me also to kind of like shut out the noise.
Okay, I mean that's a pretty brave step to take, especially because most people in our age group wouldn't necessarily have tried something like that before. So you might be the first one trying something out like that, right? And I mean it might not be a fair statement because there are other people who have started their own tuition services, but nonetheless, you might be the first one in your own group of friends to try something out like this. So I guess my question then comes down to, in the beginning there can be a lot of anxiety, a lot of fears over starting it, right? And then once you start it and you start getting into the momentum, you slowly learn to let go of it. But before we go into that step, how do you make that transition? Like, how do you force yourself to just start the ball rolling? Right.
I think one of the things that really helped me is I read a lot of books. I read a lot of books on starting things, a lot of somewhat like memoirs about other people who have started things. So like hearing their journey or seeing their journey really helped to give me the confidence that look, like these people who we now see as like super successful, right? They were also once apprehensive. They also once faced a lot of challenges. So like and kind of like reading the books helps you get the mindset that you should have. So I read a lot of these books, and because I realized that, oh look, they had similar challenges, or sometimes they even had bigger challenges, right? So seeing that actually helped me to really like have that attitude or mindset that, oh, okay, I should just try it.
Okay, and do you mind maybe naming some of these books that you read?
Sure. So I think one of my favorite books of all time is really Shoe Dog. So Shoe Dog is by Mr. Phil Knight. So Phil Knight is actually the founder of Nike. So I read his book and I was like really inspired by it. Another very interesting book that you can consider, who also shares about his challenges of starting Starbucks, right? Is the book's name is Pour Your Heart Into It. Okay, so essentially it's basically just like the book about how I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, but the way I pronounce it is Howard Schultz.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's how he basically started Starbucks, how he came up with the idea, how he got his first funding, how he expanded his stores and things like that. Yeah.
Okay, nice. So Shoe Dog and pour your heart into it.
Yeah, I mean there are more that I've read. I've read about how Facebook was started. There's others as well, but I would say these two are like for me the most inspirational. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
I will link those two books in the description.
Sure.
So that if anyone who wants to read those books, you can go ahead and check them out.
Right.
Okay, so now let's start a bit more about your early days or your early part of the IB journey or
Right.
IB Lounge journey. So what were the initial struggles that you faced when you first started out the IB Lounge business?
I think the first thing that happened, and I'm very grateful for this, was that I basically reached out to a bunch of either juniors or my peers and asked them if they were willing to explore this journey with me. So I'm very grateful for the initial batch of tutors who actually Ritik was one of them.
Yeah.
So he joined me when we were basically earning nothing, we were earning no money, we had no students. But I think they probably saw what this was, what IB Lounge was going for, and maybe they felt that it was meaningful, and that's why they must have joined it. But the biggest struggle was after they joined. We basically had a drought for 3 or 4 months where we had no students at all, or rather no new students at all. So on one hand, I had to really explain to the tutors why this was happening. On the other hand, I was trying out as many methods as I can to actually get students. So what I did was that I would go to the extent of, let's say, printing out flyers, designing and printing out flyers, going to the schools and really trying to talk to students and things like that. So obviously this is before COVID, right? So I'll talk to them, try to get them interested. But for a few months that didn't even work out. So it was just many months of trying to get students basically, yeah. And I think it definitely would have been a bit frustrating for you guys, I mean for the tutors, because they were part of this journey, they were helping me with the resources as well, but there was no students. So I think everyone was apprehensive about, is this even going to work out or not? And I think that was probably the hardest part at the start. Yeah.
I see. Okay, so maybe leading to my next question.
Sure.
In the beginning or when you're starting out a solo venture, it's a bit easier in the sense that you are only accountable to yourself. Right? If anything goes wrong, you take the full brunt of the success or the failure.
Yeah.
But when you're starting a team, like for instance a tuition service, in your case, you're going to be working with a lot of tutors, a lot of students, and if things don't go well, in a sense you are accountable to them.
Right.
You might have to answer their questions and their worries.
Yeah.
So how did you deal with that feeling of accountability in those early months when things weren't going so well?
Right. I think one thing that really really helped me was that I tried to be as open with my team as much as possible. I think at one point I even shared with you guys the strategy and the breakdown of the finances, right? How everything would work out, how much profit IB Lounge was really making and things like that. So being very open, sharing about what I was doing, really, I hope actually really helped. Being accountable, I think I also had to set the expectation, right, that this is going to be a new venture, so can't expect it to suddenly take off so fast. So I vaguely remember explaining this to the tutors as well, that it might take a while, but also sharing updates about how I'm trying to get students, I hope really helped as well. Yeah.
I see. Okay, so I guess if we liken your whole IB Lounge journey to climbing a mountain, we are right now at the beginning of the mountain, right?
Right.
We are just looking up and there's a whole peak that we have to climb.
Yeah.
So initially, at least, there's a lot of sacrifices that you will have to make. And I'm sure along the way there are as well, but usually it's in the beginning that the bigger sacrifices tend to have to be made.
Right.
So what were some of these sacrifices that you had to make in the beginning of this journey?
Right. I think probably I wouldn't say it's a super huge sacrifice, but I think it would probably be time. Yeah. So, like I mentioned, I was giving out flyers and talking to students. So, all this happened basically like, in my free time. So after school, so I'm like still in university, right? So after school or after my lessons, I will, be working on designing the promotional materials. I will be going down to the schools, giving out the flyers. So of course, this meant also that to some extent I will have to sacrifice my own free time or my time with friends and things like that. So I guess that would probably be the biggest sacrifice. I took the approach of not incurring such a huge cost at the start. So there was not much of paid kind of marketing. Yeah. So I would say the biggest sacrifice is really my time. Yeah.
Going back to this whole idea of, the whole journey being like climbing a mountain,
Right.
going back to the phase where we are just looking up, there are a lot of people probably at this stage in their own journeys, be it starting their own cooking business,
Right.
or starting a own social media page, whatever it is. And what would be your biggest advice to people who are in this stage where they are not successful yet, but rather they are still having a big dream and they are trying to chase after it?
Right. Well, I'll give two advice. One is a bit more cliche. So the more cliche one is basically to not give up. Right. I mean, I didn't take this with a pinch of salt as well because, like you have to be a bit strategic in business as well. So I guess I would say like, don't chase something without a strategy, basically, right? The second piece of advice that I'll give is to basically try to keep your costs as low as possible. In a sense, like don't go too fancy, at the start, right? So I think that is one way to really try to make it as much as possible because I think one of the biggest things that causes businesses or new ventures to fail is really the money, right? If you have to keep forking out money or huge amounts of money to sustain your business, it's going to be really hard, especially at the start because you don't have much revenue or you don't have much traction going on. So if you keep your costs low, it will basically help you to survive for a longer time and to make sure your dream can pan out as long as possible. And in that way, ensure that your success has a higher chance also. Yeah.
Okay, that's some pretty solid advice for anyone who wants to start their own thing. So now let's start, climbing this mountain. Let's get a bit more into after you have already started IB Lounge.
Right.
So we touched a little bit on this, but what were some of your struggles in getting the first few students?
Right.
So earlier you mentioned that, students might not be so understanding of new IB graduates, right?
Yeah.
Because it's relatively new,
Right.
and they might not have the confidence in these graduates. So how did you go about getting your first few customers?
Okay, so I was also very fortunate to have a really good old friend whose name is. So he really helped a lot in the start because he was helping a lot with the marketing, getting the word out there, the social media and everything. So he was a really big help, and I think both of us were really like trying our best to find students. So eventually, through probably both of our like what we did, we had some students coming in, and they basically were keen on trying. So at first, what we did was we provided free trial classes. I mean, we still do that now, but we provided free trial classes to basically let students have a feel of the lesson before they actually committed to paying for them. Yeah. So I think that really gave them a sense of confidence because they didn't have to, risk anything. They just, risk their time essentially. I think at one point even, for a very short period of time, we even resorted to telling the student that if you don't like the class, we'll actually pay you for your time. I think that's something that we even looked at and even tried for maybe like a few students. We didn't continue that, but that was what we did at the start. It was also very hands-on. We also had to really like speak with their parents, to basically like assure them that we will put in our best and help their child along the way and stuff like that. And I guess another thing is we also had to be open with the students. We had to explain that we are not like these big tuition centers. The notes may not be, maybe like at that point in time at least, presented very professionally, but we explain the value of them coming to us, which was that these are resources that actual IB graduates who have graduated with great scores have actually used. So that's kind of like how we really just be honest with them.
Okay, so getting students is one thing, but also on the same end, there'll be tutors who were part of this journey. And these tutors, initially in the beginning at least, when they were not getting the students that they were expecting, or when the pay is low for that month, something like that. How do you keep their spirits motivated? How do you get them to stay? How do you get them to see that IB Lounge will one day in the future be successful?
Right. So I think for this, it's also with the expectation, and there's pros and cons for this, that like this isn't and probably won't be a full-time job, right? And I think by explaining this to them and by having an open conversation with them, it really helps me as well to understand their motivations for being here and things like that. So some of the tutors, they are really hardworking, and they may even have part-time jobs outside of IB Lounge. So I think if finances is a concern, you can't be like too selfish and say like, oh, you can't work outside, right? So that is something that we had to come to terms with as well. In terms of kind of like keeping the spirit high and stuff, I think the most important thing is to really gain traction. So usually I try not to let a tutor wait for too long before he or she gets a student. And that way it kind of shows that, okay, I'm doing my job as well, I'm trying my best to get students, and once the student comes in, it's easier to digest, because it shows that, okay, I'm finally having a student, I can finally start doing what I set out to do from the start.
I mean, definitely sounds like you've had a lot of struggles along the way, and I'm sure that for some of these struggles, they would have probably wanted to make you give up.
Right.
So maybe can you share with us one such experience that brought you so close to giving up?
Right. I think it was, I mean, like the struggles is really like just throughout the year. Like I guess throughout the year is really just different struggles all the time. Sometimes you have to deal with tutors, sometimes you have to deal with parents, sometimes you deal with students. But I guess probably the biggest struggle that made me kind of like almost want to give up was really at the start, when we basically didn't have any students. And it really, just now I was mentioning about the drought, right? So it really seemed like for a long time there wouldn't be any students. And I was just thinking to myself, is it really that this model is not going to work? But funnily enough, whenever I have those thoughts, it's usually when things are gonna get better. So it's not only like with relation to that, but even like now, because now we have our own physical location, so we have to pay like things like rent and stuff like that. So there's questions that always, or doubts that always pop into my head, like, are we gonna survive the next month, or the next few months? What if next year there's just totally no students, right? So these things always come into my head, and but usually, I guess, thankfully as well, as long as we keep going at it, keep doing what we do best, keep providing value to the students, somehow it just works out as well.
Okay, so you mentioned that it's usually at your lowest points when you have these thoughts of giving up that it usually tends to get better. Right? And while there may be some element of luck involved in there, I'm sure a lot of it is also attributable to your involvement in terms of how you improved yourself, how you analyzed the data and worked on the feedback to really improve what you were doing. So I guess my question then is, how did you go about improving your service and your product?
So I think this comes from many perspectives, but I guess the most important thing that I felt we had to do from the start is to hear everybody's feedback. Doesn't mean we have to take everybody's feedback, but we really had to hear everybody's feedback. So, for instance, kind of like at the start, we basically had to ask all the students and their parents for feedback. And really having that intimate or personal conversation with them gave us a lot of insight as to what their doubts of us were, what improvements we can make and what was lacking. And most of the time, I would say this kind of system has to be a really like active one. Like you can't just like passively wait for them to tell you what's wrong, but you really have to like approach them. It's a very uncomfortable feeling, by the way, but to approach them and ask them, how everything is, what can be done better, and what's not going so well. So when you ask them, you really can get like a direct answer as to what can be improved. Yeah.
And when you're asking for feedback, sometimes it can be a hard pill to swallow, especially a lot of us will tend to have our ego in the way,
Right.
and we might not want to accept certain hard truths.
Right.
So how do you go about letting that ego down? How do you go about really hearing what they say instead of just letting it go in one ear and then going out the other?
Right. I think there's two pieces of advice. One is to read this book called, I know I keep mentioning books, but I love books. So one of my all-time favorite books is called I think it's called Ego is the Obstacle or something like that. It's by Ryan Holiday.
Ego is the enemy?
Ego is the Enemy, yes. It's by Ryan Holiday. So
Okay.
he wrote this really good book about how ego can lead to like a person or a company's downfall. And when I read that, I was very inspired to really take feedback from people. Yeah. So I would say the second thing is to really remember that your customers and your I guess not really in this case, but there's another saying that both your customers and your employees are the key to your business, right? So really listening to them and really taking their feedback is probably one of the most important ways to build a good new venture or a new business, because basically without your customers you are nothing, right? You can't earn any money, you can't carry out your service. Without your employees or those that work with you, you have no service to offer. Yeah, so just listening to these two are the most important, I would say.
Okay, so you did mention that listening to your customers as well as employees' feedback is pretty important.
Yeah.
But apart from that, is there any other advice that you give to people who are currently stagnating at whatever the thing that they have started?
Besides like listening.
Yes, so for some people who have started their own ventures, they may have gone past the stage of should I start this?
Right.
They may have already started it, and now they climbed a little bit, but they're stuck. And they don't exactly know what's going wrong.
Right.
And maybe they have already analyzed the data, they have heard feedback from people, but things are just still not clicking,
Right.
So for these people, is there anything else that they can do to try and figure out where they should go from here?
Right. I think besides listening and constantly trying to improve, I think another thing to keep in mind is that what you envision in your head may not always be what happens in reality. So there's this term that is quite, I feel, overused nowadays, but I can see why it's overused as well, is to basically pivot your venture. So what pivoting means is basically to find a new angle or to find a new way to do the same service that you have. So for example, one example that I can give is initially we were thinking of only offering let's say face-to-face lessons, right? We were super against like doing online lessons, but when COVID hit, we had to quickly adapt to that, and that's one example of pivoting. You can't just like, or not that you can't, but I would not advise that you just like be stubborn and just do what you think is your only business, right? So if you do that, I would say that it's quite a guarantee, not a guarantee, but I do feel like it's very hard to survive because you never know how the market will react or what kind of things will happen in the world. Yeah. So I would say be adaptable. Don't be too fixated on what you initially started with. Yeah.
Okay, so adaptability. I guess that's something that a lot of us tend to forget along the way.
Right.
So now let's start going a bit more into your achievements in IB Lounge.
Okay.
So when was the first time you really felt like, oh damn, this is going well for me?
Right.
I'm actually getting somewhere with this.
Okay, so strangely enough, I felt like we were doing pretty well during the COVID period. We offered a discount to basically kind of like match the price of online lessons, and I think it was also during the COVID period where it was rather near the exams.
Okay.
So there were
to interrupt. Yeah,
sure.
the COVID period. Do you mean like the first circuit breaker or which
First
part
circuit
of the
breaker.
timeline?
First circuit breaker, yeah.
Okay.
So we had to transition to online class.
Okay.
Yeah. So after we did that, there was suddenly like a huge influx of students, like probably more than I imagined growing at the start. So that was when I thought like, hey, this model seems to be working. But I think on the flip side, it was also something very dangerous because having the online classes also reduces the interaction that I have with the students and the tutors. So it started to become very dissociated and very much like a tuition matching service. So although it did seem like it was going well, but on the culture side and on the engagement side, it was like a danger looming behind. Yeah.
So I guess you could say that it came at a cost, right?
Yeah, it did. Yeah.
And just to clarify, how long was it until you reached this first milestone from the time you started to this influx of students?
I think it was probably from when to when?
From when you first started IB Lounge to having this huge influx of students.
So we started, IB Lounge was incorporated in around January or February.
Okay, of 2020.
Yes, of 2020, yes. Is it 2020? Yeah, yes. 2020. Okay, so it was incorporated then, and then probably the influx was maybe about, I guess you can say August, September. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's about a 6-7 month period in between. I see. Okay. And going back to this concept that you did have your first success, but it came at this cost of having a dissociated community within IB Lounge.
Right.
How did you come to terms with that? Did it make you feel like, what's the point of this success? Or did it want to make you change the way you were running things? Right. Or how did you adapt after that situation?
Right, so I think for a while I was quite, I guess, upset at it. Like I was constantly wondering why I couldn't achieve that higher sense of satisfaction of, really like interacting with the student, interacting with the tutors, building this community. But at the same time, I also remembered that, to be adaptable. So I think to a certain extent, it's also important to understand like the motivations around the different people, what the motivations of the tutors are or the students are, and to basically come to terms with accepting that once again, like the vision that you have in your head may not exactly be the reality, especially at the start. Yeah.
And I guess from then on, motivating yourself must have been quite difficult.
Right.
So how do you think people can continue motivating themselves once they have reached the first milestone? Especially because sometimes people may feel that, okay, I'm doing quite well, this may be enough for me.
Right.
Or some people may want to go beyond that, but they don't know how to continue from there. Right. So how do you keep that motivation? How do you keep the drive to keep continuing the climb?
Right. So I think there's probably two pieces of advice. One is that to dream bigger. From the start, you should maybe try to dream bigger and think of something that is really hard to achieve. And I think you have to be really realistic with yourself that you probably can't achieve this thing in like a year or even 2 years, right? It probably is going to take like super long. The other piece of advice is actually I believe is by this guy called Mark Cuban, who's like a really successful businessman. I don't know if the advice is by him, but I have heard or seen him say it somewhere. And he says like you have to imagine that your competitor is working his or her ass off to basically destroy you. And if you don't work hard or you don't put in the effort, one day that competitor is going to basically chase up to you and overtake you. Yeah. So having this in mind is important. I don't claim to work 24/7 or anything, but just having this thought that you have to keep improving does keep me on my toes. Yeah.
As a follow-up question to that, maybe this is a question I'm asking it more from a personal place.
Right.
But sometimes we do feel this need to keep working, right? Especially because we have this fear instilled in us from a young age that if you don't do well, then the next person's going to take over your spot, especially when it comes to academics. So in that regard, how do you get over the need to compare yourself with others in your age group? For example, you might see someone else who already has bought his first car at your age, and then you feel, okay, I'm still not there yet. How do you overcome those kind of feelings? How do you stop yourself from comparing yourself to other people who may be more successful than you?
I think it's really a question of being internally grounded. So, I mean, I don't claim to not feel that way, but I think it's also important to understand that everyone is in a unique position. Everyone has a unique background. So definitely everyone's pace will be different. I don't think I don't think you should really like try to compare yourself with what people have or what they don't, etc. So I think one thing that I really draw inspiration from is to really help others around you, and somehow in doing so you will feel like you don't want to compare yourself too much with others because you are just focused on helping them. So this kind of mindset actually came about from my friend whose name is Evan. So he initially helped me gave me some advice on starting this business, and I mean he himself runs a tuition center. So at first I was wondering like, oh, why are you kind of helping me, right? Because like I'm not gonna be a direct competitor, but I'm also like in a way somewhat like a competitor. So this kind of mindset actually helped me to get over the fact of like, oh, I should be comparing people. Hearing other people's journey that it takes a long while to reach kind of success also helps me to keep grounded.
Okay, so that's a pretty good mindset to have, especially because a lot of us tend to have this need that I should be first. So it's pretty commendable that you try and keep yourself grounded at all times. Okay, so now let's go a bit more into other struggles that you faced along the way. So we did mention the first kind of achievement that you had, which was this huge influx of students. But I'm sure after that first kind of major milestone, there must have been another struggle that you faced. Something that made you feel again like, okay, this is not worth it. This is something that I should probably work on, or this is not for me. What was that thing?
I would say that it is, in terms of like the business wise, there are points where we have no new students for quite a while. So that is definitely demoralizing because we are just thinking like, oh, can we survive? But I would say something that probably affected me more was what I mentioned just now, which is about the culture of the place. So there were also like tutors who feedback to me that it was beginning, or it was feeling like this was just like a matching service because we just basically allocate students and the tutor just takes over. So that kind of made me feel very demoralized because I was also that wasn't like my initial idea, and in fact I really didn't like this idea of like being a matching service. So that really made me feel very demoralized at one point. I think I was demoralized for maybe 3-4 months, like just constantly thinking about that.
And I'm sure during these 3-4 months there must have been people saying things either to your face or behind your back, saying that it's time for IB Lounge to shut down, or that it's not going to work out. So how do you deal with those naysayers at this point?
Right, I think it's also important to remember that it's really your own responsibility and your own journey. They probably don't fully understand what I'm going for. Maybe they have different motivations. Maybe they, in their mind, like doing a business is just all about earning money. So it's important to realize that you have your own motivation and others have their own motivation as well. And this dream that you have is really just yours. So I mean, feedback is good, but I think it should also be taken with a pinch of salt sometimes. That's what I would say.
And for anyone watching this who is currently at this stage where they experienced some good success with their venture, but after that everything kind of came crashing down, and they are now thinking whether they should start it back up or they should just leave. What would be your advice to them?
Okay, so I don't claim to be an expert in this. I don't know what I would do if my business were to really like crash all the way down, and I think this question also needs to be taken subjectively. Like it probably doesn't apply to everyone or everyone's venture, everyone's career or everything. And no, I don't claim to be like super successful, or I'm not even like I don't even claim for myself to be successful. So it is a bit strange to answer this question, but at the same time, I guess the one piece of advice that I'll give is if you really believe in your dream, I think Walt Disney, I think it was him, or it's either him or Stan Lee. Yeah, I think it's one of them. I remember something that they said that really kind of inspired me, which was that if you really believe in something, and I think again that shouldn't be like, you shouldn't like take that as a blanket advice, but at the same time, something that I personally believe in is that if you don't try your best, you will probably look back at it with some kind of regret. And I think you have to ask yourself, like, is that regret something that you can live with? Knowing that if you tried harder, you might have achieved something different. Yeah. So I think Stan Lee, he mentioned that he pitched like this idea of Spider-Man to like a lot of people, and they basically said that they shot it down. And now we see Spider-Man as something like so iconic, right? So like even inspirational to kids, right? But it's hard to believe that at one point people were saying that is like bullshit, or that is like something that won't work out, right? So I mean, I can't imagine like for him, right? I mean, for him it must have been even more demoralizing, because he's not starting a business in that aspect. He's like trying to sell people an idea of a fantasy superhero, right? I mean, it must have been
For the people who are getting the sales pitch, they are hearing about a spider who bit a guy, and then the guy becomes a spider slinging man.
Exactly. It sounds so ridiculous, and like I have no idea how he managed to like keep so motivated. But I guess it does come with some merit as well that eventually it did work out for him. Yeah.
Okay, so fast forward to current day IB launch. Do you think that you have achieved the success that you envisioned? And do you think it's possible for anyone or everyone to achieve the place that you are at today?
Right. So do I think that I've achieved what I set out to do? Definitely no. I have much grander ideas for IB launch in the future. But I think realistically it will take a long time. So I have to keep myself grounded that this is the reality, and to really just slowly make improvements every day. Yeah. Can everyone do this? I think with the right mindset and the right attitude, the right guidance, the right luck, the right team, definitely it's possible. Yeah.
Okay, and maybe just some final wrap-up questions.
Sure.
Right. They say that when you start something new or when you go against the grain, it can be quite a lonely process.
Right.
Do you really agree with this? How was your experience like?
I think it tends to feel quite lonely. In a certain way, like you feel like you are the only one that has this ambition, or you're the only one doing sometimes like the dirty work, like the admin stuff, or like a lot of things. I would say, like, especially if you are the one starting it, and you are in the background, right? You are doing all the background work. That can tend to feel very lonely. There's also gonna be times where you feel lonely because no one understands what you're going for, or no one wants to help you or stuff like that. But I think it's also important to and this is something that I learned myself, to be grateful basically with what you have, the people supporting you, the kind of like luck that you have as well. It's important to remind yourself to be grateful for these things, because it's often easy to feel like you're alone in it, but actually you're not 100% alone in it as well. Yeah.
Any final words of advice for anyone who's watching this?
Any final advice? I guess again, this is not like a blanket thing, right? Because I also don't want to give the wrong advice and make people suffer and do things that may not be morally correct as well. But I guess I would say, like, if you really, it's the same as what Walt Disney / Stanley said. If you really have something that you believe will work and something that you think will do a lot of good for the world, just try it, because again, you never know whether it's going to work or not unless you try it. And something that I personally believe in is that if you don't try something, you will just keep thinking about whether it will have worked out or not. So,
okay, I guess that wraps up everything. So thank you for joining us today. And
thank
Markus is also a host of this show.
Yes.
So from the next few episodes onwards, he'll be asking people questions along with me.
Yeah.
So I guess we are done for the first episode. So see you guys in the next one.